Welcome, everyone. I'm Penny Cottrell. Welcome to Writers Morning Out, a free gathering of writers of any genre, of any level, sponsored by the North Carolina Writers Network. A couple of quick announcements from the network right now. They are still taking people to sign up for the spring conference in Asheville, May 2nd to the 4th. It will be a 2-day event. Unlike usually, it's the 1-day event in Greensboro, but this time it will be longer, trying to support Asheville after the hurricane. There's also the 2025 Squire Summer Writing Workshop, July 24th to 27th, and information will come out about that May 7th, and that one is at Davidson College this year. So we are so thrilled today to have our fantastic panelist of poets led by Tom Dow. Caren Stuart is with us, Mark MacAllister, and Judith Stanton. And I'm just going to quickly read their bios. Tom Dow is a native of Washington, D.C., returning to the USA in 2000 after 16 years in Japan, teaching French and English. He received an MFA in writing from Vermont College in 2005. A collection of his poetry, Different Gates, was published in 1995 by Saru Press, Printed Matter Press Tokyo. His work has appeared in Tar River Poetry, Southern Poetry Review, Pearl, Tundra, Evergreen Chronicles, Harvard, GNL Review, Cape Fear Poetry Festival Chapbook, Red Clay Review, et al. He won the North Carolina Poetry Society MacDill Award in 2006. In Japan, the Shiki no Uta, the Japan Times, the Plaza, Printed Matter, Kirin no Me, Yomi Mono, Honorable Mention, ANA Fiction Contest, and France, Priapos, I'm sure I'm butchering that. He is a translator of the poetry of Zen monk Sengai and of various contemporary French poets. Tom is currently writing a memoir of his time in Japan. He leads poetry workshops at CCCC in North Carolina. Judith Stanton grew up in a farm in Piedmont, North Carolina, riding horses, herding cows, working tobacco, and listening to her father's stories of mules and plows and teams that pulled the wagon to town. Secretly, she read every novel and poem she could get her hands on and dreamed of writing her own. That dream came true. Her contemporary equestrian suspense, A Stallion to Die For, has a 5-star rating on Amazon.com. Her scholarly edition of the collected letters of Charlotte Smith is published by Indiana University Press. Mark MacAllister grew up in Northern Illinois, spent a great deal of formative time on his grandparents' dairy farm in Southwest Wisconsin's Driftless region, and learned to write at Oberlin College. Mark now lives in Pittsboro, North Carolina, but travels often to the Wisconsin Northwoods, and to Michigan's Upper Peninsula to hike and bike the backcountry. His poems appear in various journals, including Steam Ticket, Quiet Diamonds, the Journal of Undiscovered Poets, Deep Wild, Writing from the Backcountry, Moss Piglet, Flying South, and Passenger Journal. Mark's chapbook, Quiet Men and Their Coyotes, won the 2022 Concrete Wolf Chapbook Contest and was published in January 2023. Recently retired after a 40-year career focused on the conservation of wildlands and wildlife, Mark remains an active member of his local emergency response team, of a Red Wolf conservation organization, and of a Wisconsin-based writers cooperative. And Caren Stuart is an award-winning intuitive poet, writer, artist, and maker who lives in the wilds of Chatham County, where she writes and creates daily. She's curious and passionate about people, nature, and the arts in all of its forms. Her poetry has been published in more than 60 print and online journals and anthologies, including most recently Cackalack 2024 Anthology of Poets and Artists, the North Carolina Poetry Society's Pine Song Award-winning Poems 2024, and Ekphrasis 2024, Visual Art and Poetry inspired by it. You can find her on Instagram and Facebook as Convoluted Notions by
Notions.
KarenStewart.com. Perfect. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to hand this over to Tom now. Again, if you just joined us, if you don't mind making sure you're muted unless you're speaking, and we'll get started.
Sorry. Thank you, Penny. Great beginning there. Yeah, just very happy to see everyone. Very, very briefly, what we're going to do today is have the three panelists read some of their work and talk about their writing process, perhaps reasons why they write poetry and so forth. It's really at whatever they choose. And after that, there should be time for anyone to ask questions or make comments. So I hope that will be useful for everyone. And Caren has agreed to begin the panel discussion. So please, Caren.
Okay, can y'all hear me all right? Yes? Okay, very good. Oh, I'm glad I'm tiny on my screen. That's good. It's not as intimidating. So, yeah, so I'm Caren Stuart and I am insanely passionate about poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was like 5 or 6 years old. I do have a daily writing practice, which doesn't mean I write a poem every day, but that's a hope. So today I just wanted to share some of my shorter poems so I could show you a bunch of different things. And Tom had said we'd be talking about like maybe ways that you come to poetry or what you do to get inspired. So I'm going to talk about that. One of the things I do a lot is I write in response to art and other people's poetry. So my practice is usually sitting down with some other poems or some art and just being open to whatever comes. I do love the Cascadia Poetics Labs Poetry Postcard Festival. I've been doing it for several years. It's coming up. You guys sign up for it. It's so much fun. Anyway, you don't have to make your own postcards, but I love doing that. So I'm just going to kind of start off by showing y'all this is a card I made last year. And it's collage. I'm just cutting things out of magazines and gluing them on a postcard. But what I love about doing that is sometimes I just write a random postcard, a random poem. A lot of times the cards will inspire a poem. So this is the poem that this card inspired. Number 4, version 2, while watching you try to paint me. Mix heart into palette, swirl brush in desire, stroke canvas with your any imaginings. Hold my capture in your inhaled and exhaled breaths. I am gazing over the shoulder you've offered, whispering wishes you've conjured, or am I, winged now, dark and still, a specimen pinned to your styrofoam spreading board? 3, 2, 1. This is my transparent, ekphrastic response to my own mixed media postcard number 4. So there's that one. It's so much fun. Just being open and letting things inspire you. This one I wanted to share. This is another postcard I had created. I really don't like this one. Uh, I just thought it was kind of busy and I didn't send it to anybody because I thought, well, that's not very great. But what happened when I found it later, I was like, oh, I'm feeling a poem coming on. So this is that poem. And a lot of times, well, I'm sure y'all know this. A lot of times the poem isn't what you think it's about. And when you're writing it, it turns out to be something completely different than what you thought. This one, I like this poem because it's pretty much all metaphors that were inspired by the postcard. So this is mixed media advice with flatware. Paint the private parts onto canvas. Wield your silver palette knife as sword. Pinch whatever cheek is most deserving, and let your giant golden fork serve up a fitting slice of sky. These are short poems and they make me happy. And I'm sure Tom and the other people here that are in Tom's class are like, why is she sharing all these 2-page poems every time we have a class when she's got this horde of smaller poems? Anyway, I like the small ones too. And, sometimes I think, well, these are just little poems. What the heck? Why am I doing this? What am I going to do with them? But a lot of times you can come back and revisit your smaller poems and then they grow into something even crazier and bigger and more fun. This postcard is not my greatest attempt at art, but what happened with this is I post on Instagram and Facebook a lot about my creative practice, and I had posted that I was loving being inspired by Roy Lichtenstein's artwork in a book that I have. The fellow, Paul Nelson, that organizes Cascadia Poetics Lab's Poetry Postcard Challenge, saw my post, and I've never spoken to the man before. He's out in Seattle. I get this envelope in the mail, and it is a stash of commemorative Roy Lichtenstein stamps and a lovely note from him. And I'm like, that is about the coolest thing ever. So then I made this postcard to send to him, which I did send to him. And it's me just having a rough effort at sketching out one of the Lichtenstein illustrations. But I also started the card by gluing a page from an old book onto the card. And so the poem I ended up with pulls phrases from the text. I don't know if you can see all the text that's there, but my poem pulls fragments of text from the page that I glued on the card. So this is 8:10. 8. Late winter color in mild coastal gardens are first buds in the arrangement of sentences. Of least importance, an ant taught to turn toward the unfamiliar photograph. 10. So I don't know what it means. It was fun to write, and I think Paul enjoyed getting a weird card from me. So that was fun. Oh, the next one. How am I doing on my time? Oh, I forgot to time myself. Am I good? Tom, I'm good? Yeah, okay. This next one I wanted to share, and I have to tell you, some of y'all have heard this before. I know that Regina has heard it. So I did want to also say, if y'all are writing your poems, please share them with people, but also be kind and keep a record of who you've shared your poems with so that we don't get to hear your same poem 11 times. So anyway, I know that, let's see. I know that Regina for sure has heard this one. What I did with this, though, and this is a lot of fun to do, is get with your writerly friends. So you can do it on Zoom. You don't have to do it in person. And share somebody else's poem or some other kind of writing. And then all of you write from that. Just use it as a prompt. Spend a couple minutes writing together and then share what you wrote with each other. So this poem came from that. I was writing with Regina Y.C. Garcia. Hey, Regina, who's here. Oh, and Laura Younger, who is here, and Christy Williams, who is here. Hey, y'all. So they've all heard this before. Sorry about that. But it has some of their lines too. So this is collaging the lines of other poets with mine. I could bathe in a skillet of salt and pepper baked onion and shed no tears. I have no worries, no cares. I have no fears. I'd take a sharp-hatted man with a blue plaid eye as long as he has a briefcase full of something I don't see coming. I need you to slice my voice from where I left it perched so high. I need anybody to remind me how to cry. I am numb. I am numb. I can't even hum a few notes. So this was after writing and sharing rough drafts with Laura Younger, Christy Williams, and Regina Y.C. Garcia and borrowing some of their lines. And also a note, if y'all are going to be borrowing people's words and lines, please be sure that you give credit to them when you type your poem up, or especially if you send it to somebody. Yeah, always give credit. That's a nice thing to do. Tom, am I good for one more?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Just yell at me when I'm not.
Okay.
Or when I need to stop, or just mute me, and then I can just keep talking to myself. It's fine. So this is another fun thing that I do, and I'm sorry I picked like one of the most irritating cards I've ever pulled, but I pull a lot of times. I'll pull a tarot card or an oracle card, not to read a future, but just to look at the artwork and just let it inspire me. So this is a card that I pulled from the Muse Tarot. And it's really, the art in the deck is beautiful, most of it. For some reason, I tend to pull like the cards that annoy me the most. Anyway, this was one of those. I'm like, ugh, bleh. But I ended up writing an interesting poem. Tom, you've heard this. Judith, you've heard this. But I'm going to share it anyway, because why not? And just so, I don't know if y'all could see, this is what the poem looks like on the page. So here we go. This is, for the writers and poets, breathe, after the Muses' 8 of Swords. Was it only a tarot pull? After an eon of voices rattling words, the rise in your chest conjures space within the cage of your ribs to weep and to sow and to sweep and to hoe and to know the rise of your chest as a conjure of space within you to breathe, into nurture, into grow, into harvest. Wordsmith, you have eaten your sustenance. You have expanded into this time to breathe into deep and dive into blind and to come up for light and shine through and through your words. Well, Tarot Oracle inspired poem. Am I doing one more time?
Yes, yeah, you've only used 10 minutes, so feel
Oh,
free.
really? Oh gosh, I must be talking really fast. Sorry, you guys. This poem, I don't have a visual aid for this one, but I wanted to share it because it was inspired by other people's adventures, which is a great thing to do. If you go on Instagram or Facebook, I don't recommend going on it to be inspired by people's political posts, but for anything else, you could go on there and just see what other people are doing. And this was, this was inspired by a friend's Instagram post. And this is it's a skinny little poem. Oh no, I just think it's kind of interesting to write your poems so they look interesting on the page. This is Trusting the Trail. Oh, and I should tell you, this was a discovery. I was just checking out old friends. And this day I went to Instagram and my friend, a girlfriend, was apparently hiking the Appalachian Trail by herself. So then I had to start following those adventures. So that's pretty awesome. This is Trusting the Trail. Trusting the trail you follow into the woods, into the unknown, into the dark. You gather wood for fire and bring a ring of light tonight to sleep, to dream, to then continue on, trusting the trail. There you go. Okay, this is really my last one. I'm still good for this one, right, Tom?
Right.
Okay. This is another poem. This poem was actually not inspired by the postcard that I'm going to show you, but great way to write poems for me. And I think a lot of people just take a pen and a pad and go for a walk and then stop and just whatever comes. And so this is a poem that came on one of my morning walks. I should tell you, I sent it to a journal that has published my work before, and they did not care for it at all. So there's that. But I think the person that I sent it to on a postcard did enjoy it. So this is the postcard that I sent it on, which has nothing to do with the poem, but I just liked the card. So it was a card that I made on a dictionary page, and I just sketched the brief period of time that 3 of my potted plants were actually growing well outside on a bench. So there's that. Okay, so this is Love Song for the Crepe Myrtle at the Side of the Road. I love the golden morning light streaking through your seeking boughs. Your waving fists of pink magenta blooms as offerings up to sky. I love your stoic steadiness beside, above, the wisp of cedar tree hugged up against your side, who nestles in among the slender strips of gray-brown bark you've shed. I love your rootedness, your constancy, your always simple, splendid being. Gotta love a tree, y'all. All right, I feel like I did it within my time frame. Am I good to go?
Yeah.
Thank y'all so much for listening and humoring me.
Well, thanks, Caren. That was great. Wonderful. So nice to hear your work and also poems I haven't heard before. So thank you so much. And I love about your process.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to be here today. This is way so much fun.
Good. All right. Our next panelist is Mark MacAllister, and so I won't say anything else. Just let Mark say what he wants to say. Please.
Thanks so much, Tom. Thank you all for being here and for inviting me. I'm really happy to see people I know and people I've just met today. So as far as commenting about a writing process, a long time ago, I came to my own conclusion that poetry is nothing if not autobiographical. We write, and I don't think I'm surprising anybody in the world with that statement. So that's where I kind of launch from. For the last 40 years, I've been engaged in wildlife research, wildlands research. So essentially, for the last 40 years, I've been paid to hike and bike and camp in the backcountry, and it's been a pretty good gig. Since we're doing show and tell and visual aids, this is a little notebook that I take with me out everywhere I go in the field. It is waterproof, and I've filled dozens of them over the years with everything from notes and observations to grocery lists to something I heard on the radio that I want to check into more. But it all accumulates, and it's all kind of a nice pile to begin with, to begin working with. A lot of times I'll develop the framework of a poem when I'm actually on the move, on my bike, hiking, or something like that, and just kind of continue to turn it over in my mind, stopping every once in a while to maybe note some things down. But there have been many occasions where I've come out of the woods with at least a basic structure in place of some kind. That being said, I'm a very intense reviser, editor, and just kind of am never happy with anything. So consequently, lots and lots of revision until I call something finished. And even when I've called something finished and I'm ready to send it on to a journal, I still find myself tinkering with it, even, every time I get ready to send it out to somebody. This may be premature to mention this, but one of the questions Tom kind of asked ahead of time was about influences and where we kind of base our craft, if that's a fair thing to say. And I've always been a fan of the Black Mountain School. Those of us that are in North Carolina are at least aware of the Black Mountain School from back in the 50s. Charles Olson's experiment, Robert Curley's experiment in that sort of education. And Olson wrote an essay back in the 50s, it might have even been 1950, about what he called projective verse. And I remember reading that essay quite a while ago and being really taken with it because it felt like a much better articulation of anything that I ever said about my own poetry. And essentially what projective verse requires you to do, and I'm just going to read the quote here if you'll bear with me. A poem is energy transferred from where the poet got it by way of the poem itself all the way over to the reader. And that's what I feel is my core interest in poetry, is taking all of these experiences that I've been so lucky to have in the backcountry and raising children and attending to my father's death and all of those things that I've put together in my life, and taking that energy, taking that experience, and through the process of my own writing and the final product of a poem, being able to hand that experience over to another person. And I feel that that's been really key in my own work. And and I don't know what came first. I don't know if I just kind of felt like that's the way poetry would be, or if my poetry kind of adapted itself to that intuitive feeling. I don't know where that came from. But at any extent, what I do want to stress in terms of influences, and it's kind of a process question as well, is that notion of being open to every occurrence as an experience, as something that ultimately maybe deserves to be shared with a reader. The other thing that comes out of the Black Mountain School, and again, I think it becomes intuitive after a while, is, we all deal, those of us that write poetry, and to a certain extent, I guess maybe some prose writers also, the line is kind of that basic unit of measure, right? If poetry is a currency, then the line is a penny, and that's where it all begins. And what Olson and other folks in the Black Mountain School talk about is a poetic line is essentially the breath of the poet, and that's where that structure comes from. It's not a function of 10 syllables per line, or 16 syllables per line, or ABAB rhyme system, or anything like that. The focus is literally on the breath of the poet. And again, if you'll bear with me, Charles Olson says the line comes from the breath, from the breathing of the person who writes at the moment he writes. So ignoring the he in there, any of us write. I think it's very important to attend to when you go through when you're looking at your own lines, are the lines said with an economy of breath, and are they said with some kind of pattern of breath? And that's something that I find myself when I'm sitting and writing, is I'm constantly reading stuff out loud, reading myself back out loud, and consequently kind of measuring whether that breath is being featured and functioned in there. Real quick, and then I'll read a poem. I'm also a big fan of the beats. That era, Gary Snyder's had a huge influence on my work. I started reading Snyder early on when I was really beginning to read poetry, and that's always stuck with me really close. The beats, the prose and the poetry are pretty hard to separate, I think. And one thing that the beats do is they're wonderful at taking relatively small experiences and blowing them up into big grand things. And so consequently, I'm really taken with that. Just kind of parenthetically, I'll mention Robert Bly and the notion of leaping poetry. If you've never read Robert Bly's book on leaping poetry, Robert Bly went a little cuckoo in some other ways towards the end of his life, but he did say some important things about that. And then when I was an undergrad, I read a lot of Eastern European poets who were very dark, but they're also very precise. And I think that that was an important influence as well. Well, let me read one right now. Y'all remember back just a couple weeks, we actually had a little snow in North Carolina. Also, for those of you that maybe heard my biographical statement a while ago, I did grow up in the Midwest, and so I grew up with a very healthy helping of guilt. So I'm going to put those two things together. The title of this poem is Regarding Midwestern Guilt and Southern Snow. The storm begins after several false starts in the grayest minutes before dark. You make dinner and monitor the window above the sink. At 3 a.m., you can tell, even by the waning gibbous, that things have not let up. It keeps your wife home from the office, even as it urges you out the door at daybreak. You are first to cut tire tracks onto the unmarked State Park Road, the first to mar the lakeside trail. By the time you clear your throat and flush dozens of ducks from the cove, your shame is immense. Though soon all those that fled, leaving no sign they had just been there, begin their returns. Each landing disturbs the water, only enough to remind you how quiet the day is. So talking about influences and that sort of thing, and those are, I said they've been very important and they stay with me over time. And I think that that's what an influence is. I think an influence, there's a quantity and then there's a quality. There's a temporal aspect to it, and all those things are worth considering. Something else that I'm thinking about in terms of process and the idea that a person's sense of poetics needs to continue to grow over time is I've been thinking a lot about how to end poems. We all struggle with that. Again, prose and poets. For the longest time, my work always kind of had a definite ending. In a loose way to say it would be a takeaway of some kind, a message, the end of a story, something, a teaching, something that comes away from that. And I've been thinking more and more about whether a poem can just kind of trail off. Does it actually have to be end stopped? Does it actually have to, use a term from gymnastics, does it have to stick the landing? And I'm not convinced that it does. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at poems, and again, especially if you're writing experientially, because not all of our experiences really have a story or a takeaway or anything attended to it. You just kind of look at it and say, Well, that was an experience. That was kind of cool. That was something I was going to remember. I didn't necessarily learn anything from it. It isn't any big deal, but it's something that's worth keeping track of, and uh, it's something to consider before I move on to something else, which is maybe another way of looking at it also. So, back last fall, I took a long road trip up through far northern Canada. I spent about 6 days driving across northern Ontario. Um, Mostly indigenous lands and reservations and that sort of thing, a couple big national parks up there. And as always happens, got out of my truck, did a lot of hikes and that sort of thing, and had a few animal encounters of one kind or another, which is always good. And encounters in the wild when I'm just kind of on my own feel radically different than the very many animal encounters I had when I was being paid to encounter animals. They're two really different things. So what I want to do is talk about a poem, and this is from Pakaskwa National Park, which is up a couple hundred miles north of the northern shore of Lake Superior. And this is called Black Bear Research. Huge holy boreal forest, shivering aspen, poplar, and jack pine. All that, still I'm taken in by a pile of black bear scat, recently dropped and berry filled, already staining the surrounding shore sand purple. Had this been 2005, had this been Cades Cove, eastern Tennessee, I would have scooped a sample into a sterile bag, recorded the date and latitude and longitude, packed it out with several others to Knoxville, handed everything over to a grad student who, by the time I picked out gifts for my kids, a stuffed animal, bright orange volunteers jersey, then driven 7 hours home, would tell me which bears those were, the names of their parents, how far each had wandered from its birth den. But in the bright here and now, there's more I wish to know. Have you seen your shape in the sky? Do you stack your paws atop your nose while asleep? Why did you choose the same spot as I to come out from the safe trees? And finally, do all the leaves falling at this moment sound like rain to you too? So, uh, again, that's not a poem that ends, really. It's a poem that stops. Maybe that's the distinction that I'm looking for. But I hope and feel like that notion again of projecting those experiences over to the reader and doing what I can through that poem to put the reader in that place. I feel like that's really the core of my work and what I'm most interested in doing. So I'm a man of brevity, so I'm going to stop right there and turn it over to Judith. But again, thanks so much for your kind attention and for being here today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark. That's wonderful. Really, really like that bear poem. So it's great to hear. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's move on to Judith Stanton and see what else there is to learn about poetry today.
Let me unmute. I came to my poetry practice a long time ago, very accidentally, impulsively, unintentionally, starting at least as early as high school. And I never tried to do anything about it or with it. I just wrote for myself. I discovered a few years ago my mother had saved everything, and that I had 150 poems that I had written that she didn't let get away, and I had saved some of them, but not all of them. And it was fascinating. My excuse me. Mark, I really loved your bear poem, and I I felt a real kinship with you in that poem. My poems tend to be about whatever animal just showed up in my yard last. So I've got, or in my house, I've got a poem about a skink, a skunk, a bunches of deer, of course, varieties of birds, and just whoever inspires me. But what happened was my poetry practice seemed to be tightly connected with while I was teaching in college at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire and later at Clemson, with getting up on Saturday mornings to a stack of student papers that needed to be graded. And somehow I always needed to write a poem first. Something that had happened that week inspired me to delay the well, it wasn't really a chore, but the duty of grading all those papers with some pure enjoyment of my own for myself. But I never even showed them to people. I finally showed a few of my poems to a very dear friend who was a graduate student in English. And she said, "Judith, you're a poet." And I went, "Oh, really?" I was just, I loved reading poetry. I, I had my parents give me copies of collected poems of Robert Frost and Emily Dickinson by the time at Christmas a couple of different times, and also T.S. Eliot. So I just read poets that I had met in school and loved, and came more recently to become very devoted to Billy Collins and Mary Oliver, and read them obsessively. But I depend on the poem showing itself to me. I depend on also having finally learned, if that line comes into your head, don't ignore it. Get up and write it down. If it comes into your head while you're in bed in the middle of the night and it sounds really wonderful, it might not sound really wonderful in the morning, but if you don't write it down, it won't even be there in the morning. So that's part of the discipline of writing for me, is listen to it when it happens and capture it at the time. But I still was so not thinking of myself as a poet that a few years ago, while Al Manning was still running Writers Morning Out, he said, "Well, April's coming up and I want everybody to dust off your poems and give me a poem so we can put a poem a day on our blog." And I literally walked out of that meeting thinking, "I'm a novelist, Al. I'm not a poet. I don't have any poems for you." And of course I did. And the very next day, one of the deer in my yard presented herself to me and said, "You need to write a poem about me now." And in the next couple of years, a bunch of different deer just showed up and said, "I'm the next poem." And that ended up being my first show and tell, my first chapbook, Deer Diaries, which I was just so thrilled to get published by Finishing Line Press. I was planning to self-publish them. I didn't have any pretensions to being a poet, but I entered it in a contest that they had. Did not win the contest, but they published it. And I already had a wonderful friend who's a book designer design this cover. And I said, "Well, I have a cover. Would you like to see it?" And they grabbed it. Just doing your own cover is an absolute thrill. This is there are a couple of doe and fawn poems in here. And I found this local artist who lives in Farrington and got her to let me use this. And then I found this wonderful font that felt kind of rural and classic. And long after the book was published, I'm looking at it one day and realizing that, and I hope you can see this, that the print in the title is echoed by the crook of the fawn's leg. It was just like, how could it have been that perfect? I was just thrilled. And I will read a poem from here, which I didn't mark, so it'll take me a minute. Okay. And excuse me, Mark, you'll appreciate this. The title of this poem is Dear Scat. And so here goes. Scat in the rose beds, scat in the drive, under the pine trees dotting the lawn, down in the ditches where daylilies grow, scattered on flagstones that lead to the porch. By the Nandina, the deer, strip of red berries, over to beauty bushes and swamp azaleas they pruned for us. $200 worth of tulips beheaded before they bloomed. Whose property do they think this is, my exasperated husband asks. Ours, their cloven hoof-falls whisper since the dawn of time. So that was a lot of fun to write because he had planted, and it was literally walked out one morning, all gone, sat down, wrote the poem. Another poem I wanted to share with you and share something about the process of writing it. We had been looking for houses to downsize to. And we did 4 years ago to where we presently live. But at this one house, there was a wood behind it. And I realized as I was just, rambling around in the yard thinking I could live here, that there was this little lone squirrel, totally independent, totally uninterested in me. And how interesting, I thought. A few days later, I was walking up the road on my daily walk and took a side road and saw another squirrel and ended up writing this poem titled Squirrel at Large. Startled by a stranger in your sanctuary, you're halfway up an ancient pine when I see your twigged nest deeper in the notch of an understory dogwood. And you skinny up away from me, twitching with eons of caution carved in your DNA. But I'm just off the road, the burn of diesel in my nose from a Mercedes passing on its way to town. I don't mean to scare you, or the little frog that leaps off a moss-strewn bank from a splash of full-growth summer ferns and plops into the sun-pocked stream. We three are alone together at the edge of the end of the world. Me, your lone celebrant. And what I loved about writing this poem, and this happens sometimes, I don't write rhyme. I suck rhyming, cannot rhyme, bad rhymer. But anytime I have a poem that's in the vicinity of 14 lines, I see the potential for a sonnet. And I work on it to make it in the shape of either the Shakespearean or the Petrarchan sonnet. And if it was 15 or 16 lines, it's got to go down to 14. If it's only 12 lines, I'll find a way to beef it up to make it 14, so I'll have another unrhymed sonnet. But I do work on the meter and trying to get that to true sonnets. I think following a form, even if it's a form that you create for yourself by the length of stanzas or length of lines, following a form. What's the word I want? Refines your poem. It demands that you take more care to get it right. So that's a game that I play with myself with any number of poems. But I loved the I mean, that Mercedes really did drive by and really did stink and really did mess up the purity of the event. But it passed. And then it was just me and the squirrel and the little frog. And I treasure moments. I even have a poem, which I don't know where it is. It's an ode to the slug in my garage. So it's fun. I like that slug. And I have one last poem that I like, well, I don't read often in open mics or anything, but I like to qualify it when I read it, that it's kind of a public service announcement. And so that's fair warning. The title is 14 Steps, and it's about a staircase. It's not about a staircase, it's about other things. And there's a word in here I want to make sure you know. If you have a regular straight staircase, that's great. But if you have one like I had that takes a 90-degree turn halfway down, the treads, the steps at the curve are called winders. And a winder is not like a flat board, but it's like this. So when you're going down the stairs, you have to walk in the wide area and be careful not to trip on the narrow bit that's quite dangerous. So 14 steps. I have a terror of my stairs. Not of my stairs, but of falling down my stairs. Not of falling, but of missing the bottom tread to avoid stepping on a cat and breaking my knee. Of hurrying at the winder where the stairs turn halfway down. Of catching a heel where it narrows. Of grabbing for the banister. Of missing the top tread and tumbling head over heels, cartwheeling my arms, cracking my back, crashing in a lumpy carcass, of lying there for hours, twisted, blood oozing from my skull, of crying out, not heard, of not being able to cry out, not being seen, not found, of being found dying, of being found living, broken beyond repair. That was such a relief. At my advancing age, I never fail to grab onto the banister all the way up, all the way down on any stairs that I'm on. And that was my warning to myself as I age out. But I'm grateful to my friend who told me I was a poet. I'm grateful to Al Manning for his challenge to write poems for Writers Morning Out. And I'm especially grateful to Tom and all of the students in his classes for the wonderful inspiration and fellowship that they inspire. I think it's time for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith. Wonderful. So glad to hear your poems. And the staircase again, I hold on too.
We recommend it.
Yes, absolutely.
When we moved into our new house, it has staircase down to the basement and staircase up to the attic. No banisters. And I was having some other work done and insisted on having banisters installed. Peter fussed at me at the time, but now he's grateful too.
Good. All right. So poems can be awfully useful. So thank you. Okay. Yeah, we do have some time. So if anyone has a question to one of the panelists, or comment, this would be a time to share that. I won't call on people unless there's chaos. So just go ahead and speak, and I'm sure we'll be okay.
Les.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys because I'm no poet, but sitting here listening to you, I got inspiration and jotted down 3 different first lines and a title for short stories. So, it's contagious. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Because I
Yeah,
was in irons, as the sailors say. I was stuck for about a week or two. So thank you guys. Well done, by the way.
yeah, yeah. Thanks.
Tom, I'm going to rudely put you on the spot. I see that you have like bookcase there near you, and I know you're the host, but do you by any chance have any poem that you've written that you'd like to share with us today?
Uh-oh. Um, well,
Yes, I did just do that.
no, no, I didn't really bring, I might have something on the other side of the table, but I'm not sure. I'll have to take a quick look. But anyway, no, I like to have books around there consoling and
Right.
always seem to be affirming. Let me grab a folder.
Yay.
Um, I don't know what's in it, but if there's a poem in here, I can share it. But oh no, it's empty. Okay.
What? Oh,
No, I don't want to take. I'd love to read or share something, but I don't want to take the time to dig around. So, but thank you for the idea and the invitation. And so I'll have something next time.
okay. Well, thank you for getting up and looking in your folder.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Well,
anyway, but
I have a general question, if I may, for the poets in the Zoom room, and that is, how do you, what is what is your discipline? How do you manage the process of all of the submissions that you have obviously done to get all of these poems published? What's your process? Mark, Caren, Tom?
yeah. Well, I can say the most productive time for me was not now. I'm just not disciplined right now. But well, I used to submit a poem, at least one every month, whether I wanted to or not.
Mm,
And that commitment turned out to be amazingly productive because
mm,
somehow I just didn't worry so much about it because I knew I was just going to go ahead and do it. And of course, tried to be appropriate, the poem that felt welcome, where I sent it. But contest, no contest, open reading for journals and so forth, and a whole range, whatever I could find. And it turned out to be a great idea because it built up a certain momentum. So even after a couple of years, there were still poems kind of coming and going as a
mm.
result of that. And so, and I should really set that up again. Just
Yeah.
surrender and set it up.
Surrender is a good word.
And I won't necessarily say it's part of process, but I would say to anybody that's submitting, again, prose or poetry, um, I've had a fair amount of things published, and I remain convinced that it's entirely random. There have been some poems that I've put together and thought that's a damn good poem and sent it out to 15 places and had immediate rejections. And then I've had other poems that went out where it was like, well, it's all right. I'm happy with this one. I'll send it out and send it to one place and get it immediately accepted. So I've finally just kind of learned to live with the notion of you are never going to know what anyone's going to like. You're never going to know anybody's tastes, and consequently send out what you feel like you want people to read. And it may go somewhere, it may not, but certainly don't take it personally. Just kind of recognize that you're dealing with another editor or a group of editors that have peculiar and unknowable tastes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peculiar and unknowable sound like very valuable pieces of words to take to heart.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said there, Mark. It really, at the end of the day, I'm going to say most of the time when you send something out, it comes down to one person's opinion about the one thing that they're reading of yours. It's not a proclamation against you as a poet or even the poem. It's likely just their poor a lapse in good editorial judgment if you get a rejection. That's all it is.
I have,
And
I
oh,
also think that some of it is that they have already read something that's similar and maybe 2 or 3 things, and it's yours may be the best they've read, but it's like, I'm done with this topic today.
yeah.
So what, going with what Mark said, a lot of it is just luck. So
When I was in graduate school, I was a fiction reader for the Carolina Quarterly, which is still an active journal today. And yeah, we had that exact experience. Sometimes we had to reject something because it was just too much like something we'd just published in the previous quarter's journal, or something that we'd already accepted and we're going to publish in the next one. So you just learn to run into that. But
Yeah.
we thought we were incredibly objective and the
Well,
best
I'm curious if
possible
you all
judges. So you need to recognize that about those editors, that they love what they're doing and they take pride in exercising their judgment. So be nice.
good advice. I wanted to add to something that Tom brought up about the submission process. I hate sending poems out. It's just I would rather be writing any day or reading people's poetry instead of trying to get mine out there. But I will say what helps a lot, and I think it would probably help anybody, is to have accountability partners. So my sister Kathy Wright is here. She is working on a novel. I'm writing poems like crazy. We meet once a week on Zoom to hold each other accountable, specifically what is going on with your writing since the last time we spoke, and what are you doing about sending it out in the world. And I'm going to call out Regina Y.C. Garcia and Laura Younger and Christy L. Williams, who were all here. I would say we do a really good job of buggering each other about sending our work out and sharing information on markets that are looking for work that we think the other person might need to be sending to. So I think the getting your accountability partners and your people that are supporting you it's really important for staying motivated to send your work out. Yeah.
What a great
Thank y'all.
If I can add one other item, to me, it's important for me to send my work out as a way to show respect for whatever the sources of the ideas were, for the subjects of the poem, for the aspirations of the poem. I need to follow through, and in a way that's sending it out, letting go, but at the same time, it's part of the complete process. And it just feels very right to look at it that way for me. So it's not so much having to get published, but it's doing my part.
The sharing of it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a way to honor the poem and the inspiration. It's a way to show your gratitude for having had the experience of being moved enough to even write the poem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So any other questions, comments, anyone?
I would be curious to hear from you all a bit about the poems that don't make it, either to something you submit or to something that you had the spark of inspiration. What do you do with the stuff that didn't quite make the cut, if anything?
Good question.
Send it to somebody that has better judgment.
I sometimes think of poems that didn't get from point A to point B, I guess, as kind of like, all the cars that people keep in their front yards and they tear parts and pieces off of them and use them someplace else. Sometimes that's valuable. I keep quite literally, this may be part of the process we were talking about before, I keep every draft of every poem.
Mhm.
Yes.
Because there might be a word, a phrase, a line, something in there that I can use at some point, and I just don't want to part with those things. That's also why I have 3 milk crates full of poems at this point. But sometimes, things that you write sound great read aloud. And so, I think that sometimes that's a tip that there's something valuable, some kind of nugget or something in there that you might want to use. And then to use a really ugly phrase, sometimes we have to kill our children. And sometimes a poem that you really like part of that's failing for some other reason, you put it in a dark, dusty corner somewhere and it never sees the light of day again. But that was one of the things I'd written a list of things about what would I talk to about a person just beginning to write poetry. What would be a piece of advice, and that piece of advice is keep everything you write.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
I am very aware that even if I've put a poem away for years, sometimes I'll come across it later and realize very clearly that I didn't know really what that poem was supposed to do or be at that time, but now I can see it. And it's just such a revelation sometimes. So I'd like to, consider those possibilities, and they do occur.
Thank you.
So, other comments? Anyone? Okay. Well, I might just toss out one quick question. I would be interested in hearing from anyone, all of us. What poetry are you reading now, or have you just read that you think is particularly interesting?
I've been reading Amanda Gorman. I really love her. I think her spoken word is so beautifully done, and especially because she had a speech impediment at one point, and to use poetry as a way to overcome that is just such a beautiful gift for her to give the world.
Great.
Mm.
Thank you.
I'm going to put in a word for a strategy that I've been using for about a year now. You know how there are just dozens and dozens of those poem a day email services where they'll just drop something. And I've read some really great stuff and I've read some really terrible stuff, but it's something from out of the stratosphere every day. And so instead of reading the people I always read or taking advice, I just kind of let the random poems come in and I try to read a few of those every day just to see kind of what's out there. That being said, when I sit down and I'm serious about writing, if I want to read to kind of get the juices flowing a little bit, I go back to people that I've always depended on. Gary Snyder, Ted Kooser, people that I've depended on. And sometimes I'll read a poem that I've already read 500 times, but again, it makes things moving forward. But that random approach, like I said, it's just very cool to see all the different things that kind of come and go. And it's a good way to get you out of reading habits, just like we all have writing habits. So
Yeah, very good. I share that and I do that also. And I love being surprised.
I'm reading Nikki Giovanni right now, plus an assortment of other poets in a class I'm taking. But yeah.
Great.
And thank you everyone for your presentation. It was great.
Yes.
I don't read much poetry, but I can tell you that this group has been such an inspiration. You guys seem so passionate about it that you have inspired me to pick up a poetry book. So you should be
Yay!
proud of that.
Uh-oh, watch out.
I know,
That's
you're
great.
going to frighten me.
Oh,
Do it.
I think with your sense of of humor less that you'd really enjoy Billy Collins.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
Good
for
pick.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to again thank our panel for sharing their work and their ideas and their process and everything. I mean, I got to learn a lot, so I appreciate that. And it encourages me to keep writing and reading. So anyway, and thanks again, Penny, for coordinating this event. And thank everyone for attending.
Yeah, and Caren, it's especially nice to meet your sister, Kathy.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'm always happy to see my sister. Glad y'all could meet her.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for organizing, for being here, for sharing, for listening, for commenting. This was a lot of fun. A
Yes.
lot of fun.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay.